name's Richard Murphy. I'm from leaseholdextensions.co.uk. I'm a member of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. Here at Leasehold Extensions, we specialise in extending your lease and also buying freeholds. Well, you should extend your lease because if you don't extend your lease, the value of the flat will fall, and as the value of the flat falls, the cost of extending the lease will increase. Yeah, because as the lease reduces in the number of years, it becomes more difficult to sell your flat because the flat value will fall, and that's made worse by the fact that at a certain number of years, mortgage companies won't give mortgages, so it's important to extend your lease as soon as possible. No, there are two ways in which you can extend your lease. You can either go through the Act, which is what we call the formal route, or you can try going down the informal route, which would mean that you approach your landlord informally and ask if they're willing to extend the lease. On the informal route, the landlord is allowed to ask for whatever he really wants to ask for the cost, and also he doesn't have to give you an extra 90 years. But if you go the formal route, the landlord's obliged to give you an extra 90 years. You also, under the informal route, he can charge an increased ground rent, but in the formal route, you wouldn't have to pay a ground rent at all. Your ground rent is reduced to zero. The benefits of using an experienced chartered surveyor is that we have carried out a number of valuations and negotiations, and we can use all that experience and knowledge to try and gain the lease extension at the least possible cost to yourself. You have to wait 2 years from the date you become the registered owner. If you haven't owned the property for 2 years, you can informally approach the freeholder, who may grant you permission to extend your lease. No, you don't have to have lived at the flat for 2 years. You can be the owner and you may have rented it out. Provided you've owned it for 2 years, you can have your lease extended. You are entitled to have a 90-year extension to your lease. So if your existing lease has only got 72 years remaining, if you add the 90 years, you'll be entitled to 162 years onto your lease. If you use the informal route, it's a case of negotiating with the landlord, and he might negotiate with you for a shorter lease extension. So instead of having a full 90-year extension, you might just have the lease extended up to 99 years, which is probably the same length as the original lease was granted for. Well, generally we would advise you to check your lease length whenever you own a flat. But the critical point is when a lease is about to fall below 80 years, it's best to extend your lease before it falls below 80 years, because after that point you have to pay an additional sum to the landlord, which is known as the marriage value, and that could add significantly to the costs of your lease extension. Well, if you're in that situation, the best thing to do is to approach the landlord for an informal valuation as to how much he would charge for a lease extension. You could get that checked by having an informal valuation done by a chartered surveyor, and then you'll know what would be a fair price to pay to extend your lease before you sell the flat. I mean, quite often buyers of flats will want to reduce the price they pay for the flat if the lease is short. So in order to help you decide how much you should, if you like, knock off the price, what you need to do is really get this valuation from a chartered surveyor to give you an idea of how much you should knock off the value of the flat. An alternative way, which a lot of people choose to go down, is that they will serve a notice that can be assigned to the purchaser, so he doesn't have to wait 2 years to extend his lease once he's bought the flat from you. So quite a lot of people do that, but even if they go down that route, they really need to have a valuation to work out exactly an estimate of what it's likely to cost, so they can figure that into the offer they make to the seller of the flat. Well, the cost of the valuation varies depending on a number of factors, but as a starter, to get a ballpark figure of what you might need to pay for a premium, what we would suggest is that you have a desktop valuation. Now, prices start from £99 for a desktop valuation, and with that price you get 3 valuations. You get the worst case scenario, which is basically the most the landlord can charge for a lease extension. It also provides you with the best case scenario, which is the lease that landlord will accept for a lease extension. And also we do a likely settlement figure, which is really giving you a broad range so that you know roughly what your outgoings are likely to be. Inspected valuation is obviously more expensive and more detailed than a desktop valuation, because when we provide an inspected valuation, we have to come out and inspect your flat, we have to measure it, we then go and consult with all the local estate agents as to what the correct price for your flat would be on the basis that you'd extended your lease already. We then have to look at the lease and review the main terms of the lease, check how much your ground rents are and what they're likely to go up to, see if there are any onerous covenants in that lease which could affect the value, and then after we've done that, we provide you with the report. Now, the report incorporates 3 valuations. It's got the lowest price that you can expect to pay, which is the price that we would use to serve the notice on the landlord. Then it's got the worst case scenario, which is the highest price that you'd expect to pay for a lease extension. And then we also give you the likely settlement figure. This is the figure that we feel the Leasehold Valuation Tribunal would decide the premium would cost. So you get 3 valuations for that. If you're making an application for a lease extension under the Leasehold Reform Act, the ground rent is reduced to 0. If you went for the informal route, freeholders are less likely to agree to the ground rent being reduced to 0. They will expect to probably increase the ground rent to what's known as a modern ground rent, which can be up to £200 a year, and quite often they'll ask for that to be doubled every 25 years. Freehold really is ownership of property forever, really, what's known as in perpetuity, whereas a lease is for a restricted number of years. Quite often in flats that will be for 99 years, or it can be for 125 years, but generally the number of years are restricted when you're dealing with a lease. Flat owners can buy a freehold, but before they have that right, they have to have at least 50% of the people within the block, the flat owners within the block, to be willing to participate in the purchase. We act for leaseholders and freeholders, so quite often freeholders come to us where they're being informally approached by their tenants or leaseholders and asked how much can they purchase the lease extension for, and in those cases we help the freeholders. We're also sometimes asked to respond to notices that the freeholders receive from the tenants on a formal basis, and again we help the freeholders to work out what the price should be for the lease extension. Yeah, we can offer a desktop valuation of the freehold. It's the similar basis to the leasehold valuations that we do for leaseholders. It's £99 plus VAT per flat. Well, yes, there are additional costs. These are the reasonable costs for the freeholder. So the freeholder will be able to claim back the cost of providing a new lease, and also for the valuation that the freeholders had to get in order to determine how much the lease extension will cost. Yeah, marriage value comes around when the flat falls below the 80 years, and basically it's a difference in value between a flat with a short lease and a flat with an extended lease.